Now, after weeks of protests claiming scores of lives, talks between the Kenyan government and opposition over electoral reform in the country are set to begin. This comes after the disputed presidential vote in 2007, which resulted in violence that claimed over 1,000 lives. And now the newly heightened tension between protesters and police is proving much too close for comfort. But with just a year to go before the next election, many say that the time to avoid past mistakes is running out. So, can the East African powerhouse avoid another round of violence after the vote? And will we ever see a compromise when it comes to Kenya's electoral reform? Marshall, welcome to Talk Africa. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta has agreed to talks with the country's opposition in a bid to avert weekly protests. The opposition wants all electoral commissioners removed from office before next year's general elections. But as Robert NAGILA reports, President Kenyatta's talks have to be held within the framework of the Constitution.
Tear gas Mondays is how Kenyans have taken to describing weekly opposition protests demanding the removal of electoral officials that usually end with tear gas fired by police to disperse the protesters. But in the last couple of weeks, the protests have taken a deadly turn, with at least 4 people shot dead by security forces.
Good afternoon, everybody.
After meeting with religious leaders and the speakers of both houses of parliament, President Uhuru Kenyatta told Kenyans a joint select parliamentary committee would be set up to break the current impasse.
The mandate of the committee will be strictly and exclusively limited to the matter of IEBC.
Kenya's opposition had pushed for talks with the government to agree on a process to remove the electoral commissioners, insisting they would not be partial in next year's polls. The government, however, directed that any process must be within the framework of the Constitution, but now seems to have backed down on the talks after the violence witnessed on the streets.
It is my hope that within this framework that we have agreed with the religious community of this republic, that our friends in the Quad Coalition will also do their part to accede to this manner of handling this situation, which is clearly set out in our rules and regulations, and all of us participate in a peaceful, fair, open and transparent manner.
Over the last 24 hours, it had seemed as if the deal was far from being reached, the rhetoric by both sides increasing. But President Uhuru Kenyatta appears to have offered the opposition an olive branch, the ball now firmly in the opposition's court. When asked about the president's comments, an opposition leader simply said they welcomed the developments, but further consultations were needed. Robert NAGILA, CCTV, Nairobi, Kenya.
Now, Kenya's opposition, the Coalition for Reforms and Democracy, and the ruling Jubilee Alliance Party have both indicated that they are ready to start talks on how to reform the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. I sat down with the Executive Director of the Center for Multi-Party Democracy, Dr. CAREY Onyango, to find out more about the implications of this agreement. Mr. Onyango, thank you. Let's start with this whole question of a level playing ground in relation to the Kenya's Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. What exactly does a level electoral playing ground entail?
In relation to what you call the elections managing, the requirement is that the body is seen and perceived as a neutral arbiter. You know, like we have in a soccer match, a referee who is neutral and is not favoring either of the sides. You know, that's very, very important. Secondly, it's important for the elections management body to enjoy substantial public confidence, which has not been the case in this regard. The public confidence levels have been pretty low. so to say, and there have been perceptions that the body is not neutral, and to make matters worse, some key members of the body have been mentioned in certain irregularities, in connection with certain irregularities. That has not helped.
So in terms of not just the Kenyan situation, but even around Africa, many young democracies in Africa, what would it cost, or what would it entail to have a level playing ground?
In relationship to elections, there's a concept of electoral integrity, yeah? Which involves a lot of things, okay? The actual voting is just one of it, one of the things. There are things like electoral laws that should be seen to be good laws. There are things voters, there are things like civic education. There are so many things. A lot of these things are not, you know, in Kenya, some of them are okay, some are not so good. You remember in the 2013 general elections, there were serious questions about the voters register, things like that. The issue of voters registration has been a particularly thorny issue. You saw that when you are trying to register voters, there seemed to be a lot of apathy. The projected numbers were not really being attained. There were dismal returns, things like that.
In Africa, though, what is the most common source of dispute when it comes to election, and how do you avert that?
Usually, the most common cause of dispute in Africa, normally the playing field being perceived as being tilted in favor of whoever at that time is in power. That's a serious problem on the continent. Yeah.
What kind of policy or institutional regulations need to be in place, though, if you're to have that kind of field that you're talking about?
Yes, we have, luckily, we have a constitution which is fairly good and which has spelled out certain fundamental rules and regulations fairly well. And a lot of them belong to the Bill of Rights, so they're deeply entrenched. You can't just change them. We have quite an elaborate Elections Act, and there are proposals in Parliament to try and plug some of the loopholes. Political Parties Act, you know, in terms of laws, we are not doing so badly. What we need to institute in this country is a culture of the rule of law, okay? Respect for the rule of law. We need to address issues of impunity, you know, transparency, accountability. We need to improve in those areas. You see, when you talk about electoral integrity, this goes in tandem with the issues of accountability, transparency, and impunity. Yeah.
In terms of the Electoral Commission, though, because Kenya's Electoral Commission is on the spotlight now, but if you look back at Nigeria's Electoral Commission, it was widely hailed in 2015 for that election, but was discredited in the 2000 and the previous elections. Why is an Electoral Commission that important?
Yes, an Electoral Commission, you see, there are various kinds of elections management bodies around the world. If you go to a lot of the advanced democracies, the elections management body is the Ministry of the Interior. You don't have an independent body like we have, because there's a lot of confidence in the public service, so they can entrust it to the ministry. So you see, what matters here is the level of trust, the level of accountability, the level of transparency in whatever body is managing the elections. Yeah, and importantly, issues of the rule of law, okay? Efficiency, administrative efficiency, things like that. Yeah.
Are there countries in Africa whose electoral systems are worth emulating?
Yes, there are countries that are doing well, elections-wise. You've just mentioned the example of Nigeria. You know, that was very good. Their 2015 elections, the performance of INEC was very good. If you go to Ghana, they've consistently been doing well, even though they are, in any elections there are always complaints, but they seem to be doing well. If you go to countries like Botswana, South Africa, Mauritius, a lot of countries around Africa, Benin, yeah, some small, some big, are doing well elections-wise.
What is it that sets them apart, though? What are the laws that set them apart from those that are still struggling with their electoral systems?
You'll see that in those countries that are doing well, first of all, there's the culture, or there are a lot of respect for the rule of law, okay? then you'll see that things like impunity is not tolerated, corruption, and there's high level of accountability on the part of public bodies and officials. That will be almost a common denominator in all of them.
If you look at Kenya's situation, of course, all the protests that have been going on around the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, if you look at Kenya's situation, of course, it does bring back memories of the 2007 election violence. Is there a danger that there could be a spillover this time around?
There's always a danger that something like that could recur, but you know, we always learn with the benefit of hindsight. But I see that the public bodies seem to be prepared, you know, for this kind of thing, and they're thinking about it, which is good. It's good to be proactive, that, you know, we are not going to tolerate certain kinds of things, that we're going to come down hard on them, because that permissive culture is what would allow us to plunge into an abyss. But when you look at 2007, when you look at some of the causes of what we suffered from, some of them have not been seriously addressed. They have been addressed, but not as much as one would wish to. First of all, a very thorny issue is the issue of youth and employment among the youth, which is reaching stratospheric levels. Let me tell you, without those kind of levels of employment among the youth, 2007-8 would have been very different. Issues of national cohesion and integration, that's an issue. Issues of impunity, accountability, transparency. We got a new constitution. With the new constitution, of course, some of those issues are being addressed. Regional imbalances, we have the counties, we have what we call it, the fund for the marginalized areas of the country. Some parts of this country are for the first time having tarmac roads they never had. So some of these things are going a long way into addressing some of those grievances. But there are areas that we really need to work hard, you know, to try and address. Yeah. In
terms of Kenya's electoral body, how do you see this argument relating to the IEBC from both the government and the opposition parties? How do you see that argument panning out? How do you see that ending?
Well, it's a good sign, and you could see that when these things seem to be getting out of hand, there are very many efforts, including by ourselves, to try and, you know, broker deals, you know, that could get us out of this situation. By Kenyans, by the diplomatic community, by all kinds of people. And you can see that there are efforts to try and create some kind of a joint committee, you know, that would try and sort this issue out. That's a good sign. And I think that, for me, I'm optimistic that we are going to sort this issue out. There's a consensus, which is good. There's a consensus that we need to do something about the IEBC, you see, whether you're Jubilee, whether you're CORD, and that's a good thing. And you realize in this country, every time there's that kind of a consensus, we've always done well. Go to the 2010 referendum. Of course, there was substantive opposition, about 30%, but there was a great degree of consensus. We are talking about almost 70%. So when there's that kind of a degree of consensus, we always do well as a country.
Right. Mr. Onyango, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
We're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we'll build on these insights as we unpack Kenya's electoral reforms. Do stay with us.
We feel very strongly that the mood in this country is very clear and loud, that the present IEBC is not the body that can be able to oversee a successful election in this country. Secondly, this mood alone, even if the results are true and correct, if the same IEBC announces it, it will not be accepted by anybody.
That was a member of the Kenyan opposition in Kisumu speaking of their desire for electoral reform in the country. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Now, to broaden this debate, I have two Kenyan political commentators standing by to give us both sides of the argument. Standing by is Professor Macharia Munene, and with me here in studio is Dr. Adam Zolo. To you both, thank you for joining in this discussion. Dr. Adam Zolo, let me start off with you here. Give us your immediate reaction, though, to this whole debate of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission here, because the IEBC ran an election in 2013. What do you think?
Well, basically, when you're going into an election, there's supposed to be an election management body that is considered as a fair referee that will give a free and fair verdict on the electoral process. And indeed, the same IEBC did conduct the elections of 2013, which were contested by the then CORD coalition. Of course, that decision was endorsed by the Supreme Court, but a lot of questions remained over it. As you read, the same Supreme Court had an indictment on the same IEBC on technological issues, for example. Subsequently, we have had the British authorities and indicting certain individuals who currently sit in the IEBC, basically saying that there was a chicken gate scandal in which they have already convicted people in Britain. Yet in Kenya, the case is still in EACC. We've also seen the current parliament indict the same commission, that is through the Public Accounts Committee. But that is yet to be debated.
Right. Professor Macharia, what's your take on this whole debate on the IEBC?
Well, the main thing is that the IEBC has, for some reason, lost the confidence of a large segment of the Kenyan public. That does not mean that it is guilty of anything, but once people lose confidence in an institution, it helps if the people in it, the individuals, can be changed for the sake of the perception. What happened with the IEBC was that it conducted the elections fairly well in 2013. There were hitches here and there, and the loser at the time decided that he didn't like the IEBC composition as it was at the time because they did not declare him the winner. Right. That was the main thing, because remember that these commissioners, they were all approved by him. They are his people. And so it is a matter of conjecture as to what it is that would happen. So the main issue is a procedural thing. You remove some people, put in some new ones, the ones that you think will do the job better, and it should go on. And the people in it should be given a good package to go home, right. Mainly because they have lost the confidence of a large segment of the public. The
argument here, though, Dr. Adams-Olo, is that whatever, both parties are in agreement, the opposition and the ruling party are both in agreement that perhaps the IEBC commissioners must be replaced. But the argument here is that it must be done within the confines of the Constitution. Is that the only way that it can be handled?
Well, basically, I think that if you go by the fact that right now we have a parliamentary select committee, which is the route that has been adopted, of course, with the help of diplomats, then one can say that the Constitution does indicate the procedure through which IEBC commissioners can be removed from office. But I think let's not forget one thing. The Constitution is there, but we also know that the President of the country is not only the head of government, he's also the head of state. And one of the cardinal roles that the same Constitution talks about is that the President must remain a symbol of national unity. The President, in addition to ensuring that there is rule of law, must also make sure that the Article 10 on the principles of governance are sustained. And therefore, in my view, there are usually exceptional circumstances in any given country, right, whereby the head of state rises above partisan politics and comes to ensure that the country moves forward. And therefore, in my view, in this case, because we have a presidential system in which the head of state is also the head of government, there comes a time in which he must step back and leave his role as the head of government and therefore head of Jubilee coalition and play that role of head of state where every other Kenyan falls under him.
Professor Macharia, do you feel that the country has moved in the right direction, though Kenya has moved in addressing its electoral reform issues?
I think as a country, Kenya is moving in the right direction. It is a tragedy, one may say, that the IBC that's supposed to be independent has been badgered and cornered and made to look ridiculous, such that even if it wanted, it cannot conduct the election the way it should be, just because it's no longer being seen as independent. It's been made to be unindependent instead of being the independent. This is a tragedy in the sense that the institutions that we think and put in place to work, if they cannot work independently because they are being harassed, then you have a problem in the country. Now, the removal of the commissioners, because we are not talking about removing the IBC, we're just removing the commissioners and putting some new people who might be seen as better than the ones who are there, which I doubt. The reforms that are coming up, they are really not serious reforms. The only serious thing I hear that may be coming along is to change the number of days that are allowed for petitioning the election.
Let me get Dr. Adam Solo's view here. Do you agree, though, that the reforms that are going to be undertaken are not that serious?
First, let me say this. I think that when you talk of a body as an independent body, then the persons occupying those offices must act and demonstrate that and show that they are independent. But when you have a chair of a commission where one of the parties have gone to court and he swears an affidavit going into the personality that this is a perennial loser, then you lose your independence because you are already judgmental and you are not looking at the facts of the elections. You are going into the personality. And therefore, it shows that in your own opinion as the chair of that commission, you already have an opinion that this is always a loser, and therefore people might not expect you to be fair. But let's go back to the reforms that are there. I think the reforms, to an extent, we have to give credit to Parliament that they have gone an extra mile.
Right.
For example, if you look at the selection panel, you must realize that then we had a coalition government which expected the president and the minister to nominate people to that selection panel. That had to be changed because right now you only have the president, and to that extent every other nominee would come from the president. And yes, the president is a player in that very same election, at least in this instance. So that had to change. Yeah.
Right. I'll get Professor's view on this, though. In terms of the electoral reforms that, in your view, should be conducted, because your argument is that perhaps the electoral reforms that Kenya is undertaking are not in tandem with what should be undertaken. What do you think should be done?
Well, we need a mass education, particularly of the political leaders, because they are the ones who create confusion. They create institutions in which they have no trust or faith, and then they will go ahead and undermine the very same institutions. So if we can create a sense of faith in the organs that we create, it will be very good. Because as long as we have the same kind of mentality, going in and going out, we are going to have the same problems all over again, whether it is the particular commissioners who are there, whether it is new commissioners. If the major players do not change their attitude, and you have people who are very influential, who are consistent in undermining the institutions that they create, then we shall continue saying, let's change the institutions, change the institutions. And the institutions are not the issue anymore. It is the attitude of the particular individuals who happen to be very influential politically. When that is not addressed, when we do not address the particular leadership of individuals, then we are beating about the bush.
Right. Dr. Olo, of course, this does bring back memories for Kenyans of the 2007-2008 election violence, because we've been seeing a lot of protests over the last few months regarding the whole debate around the IEBC. Is there a likelihood, though, of a spillover into post-election violence in the event that the public is not happy with the electoral reforms that have been undertaken?
I don't think it's only about electoral reforms. It's about being seen to be free and fair. For example, look here, in 2002, we had a situation in which the ECK, and I believe apart from the referendums, that was the only election in which there was no petition. And it was simply because, I don't think that it was that ECK performed any better. It was simply because the margin was too wide for anybody to accuse the Electoral Commission of having rigged the elections. But more importantly for me, I just want to differ a little bit with Professor Macharia, because he seems to say that the institutions are okay. But the question I would ask of the IEBC, there were a lot of challenges that it faced in 2013. What have they done about it? If you ask the IEBC today, that one of the questions that arose in the 2013 petition was about having a register that was a moving target, a voter register that was a moving target. If you ask them today, do you have a harmonized register? No. What are you doing about it? They answer you. And that raises the question, is that are they being manipulated from somewhere so that that register keeps on being a moving target? You remember, the same Supreme Court said that there were some Form 34 and 36 which were missing. So what did you use to tally, and what have you done about it?
I want to get a final comment, though, from Professor Macharia, the post-election violence situation following the protests that we have seen in Kenya in the past couple of months. Is there a danger, though? Is there any threat at all to Kenya's political stability?
Yes, there is always a danger. And I usually like to disagree with the term post-election violence because it is a cover-up, a terminological cover-up, because the violence started before the election itself. That's why you had some people voting in makeshift voting booths rather than where they should have been. So when you say post-election violence, that's a terminological cover-up for what? Because it appears the whole thing was an orchestrated campaign to discredit, to destroy, to maim, and it happened because some people seemingly had planned it. Now we do have a threat. The difference, I think, would be that the government would be alert to this kind of development before it escalates to that level where some people may want to mount violence as a political tool. That, I think, will not happen. Fortunately, I think we are moving in the right direction, but the danger is always there. That's why people should be alert. And not just the government, but every Kenyan should be alert to that possibility.
Right, and that's all we have time for this week. But thank you to both my guests, Dr. Adams Olo and Professor Macharia Munene, for their insights. Remember, you can join the conversation online through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And do join us again next week for another edition of Talk Africa. Goodbye.